Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into a really fascinating sermon from the Miyoshi City Bible Church. We're going to explore their specific theological perspectives on things like divine healing, spiritual resilience, and how ancient texts actually map on to our modern struggles. Whether you're already familiar with these concepts or, just kind of curious about how faith structures the whole idea of human suffering and restoration, well, there are some absolutely profound insights here to unpack.
Right off the bat, the speaker hooks the audience with this universal reality. When the storms of life hit, what is your foundation? It's a pretty heavy starting point, right? Because he isn't just talking about a literal rainstorm. He's talking about those inevitable crises, sudden illnesses, and deep emotional hardships that, let's face it, every single one of us is going to face at some point. He's basically asking the congregation to really, genuinely evaluate what holds them up when the ground underneath them starts to shake.
To unpack this 50-minute religious discourse, we've distilled the core message into 5 thematic pillars: preparing for life's storms, building a solid foundation, a God willing to heal, the authority of the Word, and finally, holistic restoration.
Okay, let's dive right into part 1, preparing for life's storms.
According to the sermon, even the absolute most devout believers face sudden trials. The pastor doesn't shy away from this at all. Actually, he illustrates it by candidly recounting his own sudden illness. And get this, the irony here is wild. He got sick the very day after he preached a powerful message on divine healing. He uses this personal anecdote to show that, hey, having faith doesn't just magically make you immune to life's storms. If anything, it highlights exactly why spiritual readiness has to be built proactively, long before a crisis ever actually hits. To really hammer this home, he uses a super tangible metaphor. He talks about building wooden playground equipment for the local community. Now, he had to apply wood preservative to it 3 separate times. Why? Well, because without it, the wood just absorbs water and rots right away. He draws a direct, literal parallel here to the spiritual life. Faith, he argues, needs continuous preservative through prayer and weekly teaching just to survive the harsh elements of life. You can't just build a playground and walk away, right? Active maintenance is totally required.
Moving right along to part 2, building a solid foundation.
The sermon draws this really famous contrast from the Gospel of Matthew, the house built on the rock versus the house built on the sand. The rock, of course, represents preparation, resilience, and actionable faith. But what's truly fascinating to me is how the pastor maps the house on the sand directly onto modern society. He equates that shifting sand to today's emotional instability. He specifically points out how isolated and vulnerable modern youth feel when they're forced to build their entire identities on the shifting sands of social media and societal pressure. Then, the speaker introduces another local, highly relatable metaphor to drive this concept home. He talks about a shaky neighborhood garbage station. Initially, this little structure was just sitting right on the dirt, wobbling precariously. To make sure it could actually withstand the incredibly violent Japanese typhoon season, they had to go in and reinforce the base with solid cement. The takeaway? You have to pour the cement of your faith while the weather is calm so your structure holds firm when that typhoon inevitably hits.
This brings us to part 3, a God willing to heal.
Here, the speaker turns to the profound loneliness of the biblical leper. In ancient times, this disease meant ultimate social isolation. You were branded an absolute outcast, kept entirely away from the rest of society. But the pastor brilliantly connects this ancient isolation to the very modern anxiety of individuals today. People who feel rejected, bullied, or just completely alone in our highly digital yet deeply disconnected society. The leper's core struggle wasn't just a physical disease. It was the sheer emotional weight of wondering, is God actually willing to heal someone like me who society has totally discarded? What's so interesting here is the theological climax of that story. The leper asks if Jesus is willing to heal him, and Jesus responds with a definitive, "I am willing," or, as the pastor translates the underlying sentiment, "I joyfully want to." Think about the historical context for a second. Jesus breaks deeply entrenched ancient social and religious taboos to physically touch the untouchable, out of pure compassion. The sermon emphasizes that this willingness isn't some reluctant burden. It is a joyful, proactive desire to restore the marginalized.
To deepen this point, the pastor brings up a fascinating linguistic connection. He points out that the English word blessing is etymologically tied to the concept of blood and sacrifice. According to this framework, a true spiritual blessing isn't just a cheap, easy gift. No, it requires a profound cost. It bridges the gap between Jesus' ultimate sacrifice on the cross and the believer's restoration today, suggesting that divine healing is deeply rooted in an incredibly sacrificial act.
Okay, let's look at part 4, the authority of the word.
The speaker outlines a clear biblical pattern by listing 3 consecutive miracles from Matthew chapter 8. Together, they establish this whole framework for divine authority over physical ailments. First, you have the leper, representing healing through compassionate touch. Second, the centurion's servant, representing healing through spoken authority from a distance. And third, Peter's mother-in-law, representing healing through actively rebuking a fever.
Looking a bit closer at that second example, the pastor draws a brilliant parallel to military chains of command. The centurion was a man of military rank, right? So he fundamentally understood that when a higher-up gives an order, it is executed without question. Because he understood this strict hierarchical authority, the centurion totally trusted that Jesus simply had to send his word to enact healing from afar. He didn't even need to be physically present in the room. It's such a powerful lesson in trusting an unseen ultimate authority.
So the crucial point here is how the sermon outlines actionable spiritual mechanics, illustrated by that third story of Peter's mother-in-law. The pastor outlines a very specific process. Step 1, sickness strikes. But then, step 2, rather than just passively accepting it, Jesus spiritually rebukes the fever. This leads directly to step 3, immediate physical healing. But it's step 4 that is absolutely the most crucial. The restored individual immediately rises to serve. The healing isn't the end of the story, you see. It has a direct, active outcome.
Finally, that leads us right into part 5, holistic restoration.
The pastor asserts that true divine healing is never, ever just about fixing a physical symptom. He defines it as a complete, holistic restoration encompassing 3 distinct areas that all have to align. First is the spirit, which is the restoration of an individual's fundamental relationship with God. Second is the soul, which involves finding emotional and mental peace, free from that anxiety and isolation we discussed earlier. And third is the body, the actual restoration of physical capability.
But why does all of this holistic restoration actually matter? Well, the core message here is that complete restoration is never just for your own personal comfort. You aren't healed just so you can sit back, relax, and take it easy. The ultimate purpose is empowerment. It equips the individual to rise up just exactly like Peter's mother-in-law did and purposefully serve their community. It's entirely about fulfilling a much greater life mission and paying that restoration forward.
Which leaves us to ponder this wonderfully structured theological worldview and the exact question the pastor left his own congregation with. If true holistic restoration prepares us to serve others, well, how are you actively building your foundation before the next storm hits? Are you laying down shifting sand, or are you pouring the cement while the weather is still calm? It's a genuinely compelling framework for viewing adversity, community service, and personal resilience. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and I'll catch you next time.